Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Brian Schreiner. I'm the Dean of the FIU College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts here in Miami, Florida. Our topic this afternoon is the role of the media in contemporary society. We're fortunate to be joined by the new executive editor of the Miami Herald, El Nuevo Herald, and the Bradenton Herald, Miss Monica Richardson. Ms. Richardson brings 30 years of professional journalism experience, most recently serving as the senior managing editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She is also the Miami Herald's first Black editor of the paper's 117-year history. Ms. Richardson joins us here in South Florida during challenging times for journalism nationally, but especially for local newspapers around the country. And during a pandemic where employees are, for the most part, still working remotely. The Herald and El Nuevo Herald have an outstanding and long-standing history of keeping our community informed and shining lights on topics of local, national, and international importance. Personally, I'm looking forward to this afternoon's conversation, and I'm pleased we are joined by so many FIU students this afternoon. I'm especially looking forward to Ms. Richardson's thoughts on the challenges and opportunities of her new position and role of local professional journalism, especially as an essential force in our democracy. In my opinion, the Herald made an excellent choice in bringing Ms. Richardson to South Florida, and I have no doubt she will continue and expand the essential work of the Herald and the El Nuevo Herald. So without further ado, it's now my pleasure to introduce you to my longtime friend and colleague, Dr. John Stack, professor and founding dean of the FIU Steven J. School of International and Public Affairs. Dr. Stack.
Thank you so much, Brian. And back to you. It's an honor to be here today with you for the second installment of this important series. We are proud to join with you and the School of Communication and Journalism to host these conversations with leading figures in journalism and the media. The media plays a critically important role in our democracy and in our world. We have seen this throughout the globe as people struggle for human rights and democracy. And right here at home, where our local newspaper, the Miami Herald, has been a champion for similar issues at a local, state, and national level. We're grateful to the Herald's leadership for supporting us in recent years by participating in our State of the World event. Both Mindy Marquez and Nancy Akram joined us as speakers, and we hope that the partnership will continue on in the future. I want to briefly acknowledge the Green family, whose support helps make today's event possible, through our Dorothea Green lecture series. We are so grateful to Ambassador Green and his wife Dorothea and his daughter Kimberly. And now I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, our senior fellow, David Kramer, with a warm, warm welcome to the new Monica Richards at the Herald.
Dean Stack, thanks so much. Dean Schreiner, thank you very much. It's great to be back with the two of you in this wonderful partnership between Green School and the School of Communication. So I'm grateful to both of you for this. And it's a privilege for me to be back here. We started this series last month with Marty Barron, who recently stepped down as the executive editor of the Washington Post. And we do have, as Dean Schreiner said and Dean Stack said, the perfect person to follow up on that. And that is with Monica Richardson, the new executive editor here at the Miami Herald. And Ms. Richardson, Monica, if I may, you most recently were the senior managing editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where you had worked for 15 years. How is it? Tell us how you wound up here at Miami and at the Herald.
Of course, first I want to thank you for having me. Marty is quite an act to follow, so I appreciate being considered among him, among this media group, and excited to be a part of this overall effort. So how I got here really is So I would say it started years ago, right? I think it started through relationship building. I was actually not in the market, not really looking for a job. Was doing pretty good and fairly happy in Atlanta, but McClatchy reached out. I, had some friends and partnerships in McClatchy and knew Mindy very well, the previous senator. Had known her for many, many years, actually, back from my times in Kentucky when I worked for Knight Ridder before it became McClatchy. So it really came from established relationships, honestly, because like I said, wasn't really in the market, wasn't looking, but it was definitely a career opportunity that came my way. I've never been a person to chase titles. So if it was about a title, if it was about being editor, I probably could have stayed in Atlanta and done that and had that aspiration. But I came here because first I saw great journalism happening. I mean, I wouldn't have come here otherwise, right? It is a room full of incredible journalists. The talent and the legacy in the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald and Richardson Herald really, really is incredible. And so, that made it easy to make a tough decision about whether or not I wanted to uproot after so many years in Atlanta. But I saw an opportunity to make a difference. I saw an opportunity to give my daughter give my daughter an experience in South Florida that she wouldn't otherwise get. So happy to be here. It's been quite challenging. I started in January and have been physically in Miami for about 2 months. So it's been quite a challenge.
Yeah, I was going to ask you next. You obviously started in what we hope will be the tail end of the pandemic. We hope to see the end in sight of it. But what has been the biggest adjustment for you coming from Atlanta and the Journal-Constitution to Miami and the Herald?
Yeah, I think a number of things. I just hit on one of them, that challenge of moving here, and you hit on that too, David, the challenge of moving here in the middle of a pandemic. Everything on the personal side, from having to find a home virtually and stepping into the house for the first time physically and hoping it was what I thought it was going to be. On the professional side, newsrooms are about walking over to somebody's desk and having a conversation and very impromptu. And that is where the energy of a newsroom is, like in the physical room. So I've had to meet my staff virtually. Now that I'm fully vaccinated, I've had the opportunity to get out more, meet the community more, do some one-on-ones with some staff members, but in no way is it the same as being in a newsroom. There's nothing like that, especially in big moments of breaking news, right? You want to be there. You want to congratulate people on their good work, and you want to talk about the news and what's happening in the world. And so that has been a huge, huge adjustment, trying to get to know my staff at a really, a personal level virtually. It's a cultural adjustment too. For me personally, it's like being in another country, which has its challenges. I don't speak Spanish, and I'm the editor of the Spanish language newspaper. So you can imagine that kind of challenge as well.
You catch all the typos.
Well, yeah, for sure. Thank goodness for Google Translation, which isn't never right either. So it's been, those are things that, but you know what, I'm a journalist, and what comes with being a journalist is realizing that you're always in constant change, and it's a constant adjustment, and change is constant, really. And so, and that has proven to be the case for me across my career. And I've never done anything else. This is all I've ever wanted to do. From the time I was my daughter's age, I have an 8-year-old, and I knew then I wanted to be a journalist. So it's in my blood, and it is in my soul and my heart. And so I think I probably could climb any mountain knowing that that's the mission that I'm serving.
Great. And we'll come back to that at the end, because I want to ask you at the end what advice you give to aspiring journalists who are out there. We have a School of Communications, but let me stick with the Herald for a bit here. And as you know, you arrived at a challenging time for the Herald because of the McClatchy bankruptcy proceedings last year. And I guess my question is, how is the Herald doing these days? Has it emerged from the bankruptcy in a stronger position? And how do you see these financial challenges affecting the Herald's ability to cover the news?
Yeah, I think first I'll acknowledge the challenge for sure. This is fairly recent, just happened last year. Financially, the Miami Herald is working on diversifying revenues, really for long-term economic stability, similar to many other media companies right now. Revenue resources have changed. For example, in our advertising side, we're thinking about the need to diversify. We're thinking about how we reach more audience. We are still doing some community funding. That's become a huge model and strategy for newsrooms across the country. And McClatchy has a huge effort in that space as well. I'm pleased to say that through the course of the last year, the one thing that has remained steady is the news team, because McClatchy has definitely made a commitment to that the journalism is at the core of what we do, right? So we don't want to start to pull from our newsrooms, or pull the reporting staff from our newsrooms. But we'll continue to aggressively manage costs. I'm not saying anything that any newsroom in America wouldn't say. We've got to be very diligent in solving for areas such as news and being more innovative, and really looking for long-term opportunities. I would go back to that economic stability is what we're striving for. So I'd say right now we're in a place of challenge. I think that's fair to say. But I think that we are hoping to see some light at the end of that tunnel, and also be able to not just sustain the resources in the newsroom, but also grow them.
Well, that's good to hear, because of course we all know that there have been many newspapers around the country that have really struggled, a number of which have had to close, unfortunately, haven't been able to make the adjustment from sort of the hard copy delivery or sold on the newsstand to the to a very digital.
And some have gone to different models. We've seen newspapers cut numbers of days a week. You know, that was something that the Herald, of course, obviously did with its Saturday edition. And so those are tough things to do. But what you want to be able to do is keep the talent, right? You want to be able to keep the journalists, and so you have to make those tough decisions. And I'm with you on that. It's sad. It really saddens me, because there are communities that are in news deserts. Think about that. There are places where the only place you can get your news is through social media, and that's dangerous. That's really it hurts to know that there are places, because it can destroy. You know, we exist to build up our communities, and so and to change lives. And so if you don't have that as a source, that's a hurtful thing to know.
Yeah, there's no fact checking. There are no editors.
Exactly.
There's none of the vetting process that you would have at, say, the Herald, which is so important. And your point, I think, is critical as well. That particularly as we've discovered living through the pandemic, the Herald has provided some of the most basic and important information we need about numbers of infections, where to get vaccines. All of this has been, in some cases, life-saving information. So let me ask you about some of these other challenges. I sort of touched on it a bit, but again, many newspapers have struggled moving to more of a digital kind of platform. And how do you see the Herald in looking ahead? I appreciate that you've just been there a couple months, but it seems that online, electronic, digital is increasingly the wave of the future. Do you think that's the case at the Herald too?
I think so. I mean, I would say that we have not ignored print. We still have a good audience of print. We still have people who love to pick up the paper and flip the pages. And so print has to be a priority still. But on the flip side of that is growth. You have to think about, I just talked about economic stability that comes through growth and audience growth on the digital side. And so while we haven't ignored print, we are definitely placing more emphasis on our digital products. And that's not just the website. It is how we are thinking about diversifying how we reach audience and meeting people where they are, if you will. Because if I'd only think about it as we have a great website or we have a great e-edition to help people make that transition to digital, for instance, the one thing that we have to also do is think about how we show up in someone's inbox, how we show up in new social media platforms that seem to be emerging constantly, how we show up against newsletters that are being created from, and someone in just every day, right? That there are platforms that exist to build up new segments of audience for local news. And so our competition anymore and our thoughts anymore can't just be about the printed paper and the website. It has to be about focus more on how we are reaching and touching people where they are and how we're getting into homes. Because if you only think that someone will go and get a subscription, or someone will pick up a single copy, or someone will go to the website, that's not enough. You have to have a really 360 approach to it. So I would, going back to the main answer to that is yes, digital is a huge focus. It's one of the reasons, obviously, I came with that experience from Atlanta, having spent most of my time leading the digital strategy for the newsroom there. And so part of my expectations is that we will grow in that space. I think we just have to figure out where are the places we need to be, and then what is the content we're serving in those places. And that's an uphill climb. It really is, because there are some audiences we see and we don't want to use like the balance of how much you are focused on your current and existing audience, and then where you put resources into new audience. One of the things we have to also think about is how we're getting the content and creating the content. So we're having conversations about AI, and what that means to a newsroom and how that can both create content and also how it can help journalists do their work better and do their jobs better. And so all of that is really embedded in our digital growth. But at the core of all of that still is great journalism, right? So there's, part of my brain focused on the business side and the distribution methods and the audience growth, but not neglecting the fact that it all starts with the content.
Maybe before I get into another question, let me just reinforce, I think, a chat message that our audience has seen. Feel free to send in any questions you might have through the Q&A function, and we will do our best to get to those in just a little bit. But let me ask you about news coverage and ratings or subscriptions, however you want to phrase it. And that involves the coverage of former President Donald Trump. He had famously said that the cable networks and the newspapers were going to lose readers and viewers after he was gone as president. Do newsrooms, even though they strive for objectivity and neutrality on issues and simply report the news, do you think newsrooms miss Donald Trump in terms of coverage?
I'll say this. I think the Trump bump, as we called it in the newsrooms, is real. I think there was a Trump bump. And that came from people who agreed or disagreed with, his presidency and what he did. But there's also that same bump happens with COVID, right? We're already seeing changes in audience habit with COVID, for instance. The numbers that we had on COVID content last year are not the same that they are now, right? And so I think that the news cycle comes with ebbs and flows, and Trump was a part of that ebb and flow. And so, yes, I would agree there was definitely a Trump bump, but I think that happens across anything, right? Whenever there's big breaking news, this week is an example of that, right? The news we had this week, the racial reckoning from 2020 to now, all of those things have had their own kind of, rise and fall of the audience. And so, from a political standpoint, I would say, maybe he was right, maybe he was wrong. There was definitely a Trump bump, right? But it's no different than anything else in the news cycle, where the behaviors of the audience are going to shift based on what's happening at the time and what's happening at the moment. And so that just means that we have to stay constantly, not only are we staying constantly focused on what's happening on the day-to-day, but we also got to be, we just finished a huge series around the NICA and what's happening with, birth, the birth project that we did. That kind of journalism has to keep happening. So part of our mission is to make sure that in our coverage of local news, that it's just not reactive, right? Because The Trump bump in a lot of ways was partially reactive, although we were creating great enterprise out of that as well. But if you only depend on that, that's not what's sustaining you, right? That's not that you can't just put all your energy and focus on that. And so we have continued to make sure that we focus on growing local news, staying focused on key investigative opportunities and moments, to be able to tell stories in different ways. And the news cycle is something we stay, we keep on it, but we got to have other things to mix into that, because we also know that there's part of the audience that doesn't want, they get, come to a place of exhaustion on reading politics. They come to a place of exhaustion on issues around race relations, unfortunately. And so we've got to think, again, getting back to that 360, giving people what they want when they want it, but also anticipating that something. Hopefully that answered your question, Dave.
It does. No, I appreciate it. And but at the same time, making your job even more challenging have been the attacks and denigration of the media across the board.
Right.
Fake news, enemy of the people, some harsh rhetoric that we haven't heard in a long, long time. How does a newspaper like the Herald, or even based on your experience at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, how do you restore trust or maintain trust among the public, among your readers?
Yeah, I think, so I would say that the Herald, and I think the AJC as well, are both trusted, credible news sources. And that's the thing that we have to stand behind, and not try to spend our energy on changing what's happening with fake news, right? We just have to stay focused on the fact that our mission is to provide credible news, to be a credible news source. And so when you get into the weeds of that, I think then is where I would say the Miami Herald has to work on that issue of trust in communities, because there are pockets of communities that we lost trust even before the last 2 years, right? That we lost trust in the Black community. That's something that we're working on right now. We've lost trust in other segments and demographics where we've got to. One of the things we're focused on this year is rebuilding community connections, and that looks different in different ways. We're started a series of community listening sessions. We're thinking about how we can expand that across communities. And so we, and also making sure that, we are an incredible source for accountability journalism, but we've also got to be able to tell the stories of people's lives. And when you start to do that, you develop a different kind of relationship with your audience, so that you don't just show up when something is happening, but you've got that relationship where you've been covering the community and you're always there, whether the story, is good or not so good. And so it just, what that moment did was realize that we need to refocus ourselves, right? Refocus the fact that, and be honest and say that, yeah, we have lost trust. But where are the places we've lost trust, and what can we do about it? And put some real planning behind that. And that is what the Herald and the McClatchy are focused on doing with its audiences right now, is putting some energy and focus around how do we first recognizing where the trust has been lost, and then having a plan for rebuilding it. And so, I do think that the fake news, and I even hate that term, right? It's like, it just, it's constant. It is constant. News is coming out of people's garages and basements. And, you look at headlines. I always tell my friends, where did you get that from? Like, look at the source.
Exactly.
Look at the source, right? And I talked about being a credible news source. Is it a credible news source? Who sent it to you? Now click on that. Where does it take you to? Oh, it takes you to some site you don't even know where you're at, right? Okay, so, but not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody's going to take the time to do that. They look at the headlines, their headline browsers. And so my job is to make sure that our news is showing up in the right places and showing up in their feeds to be able to counter that fake news, if you will. not counter it in the sense that here's the true story. Here are the real stories that you should be following. And so the other thing I think we have is longevity, right? Over 100 years, right? Who would have thought? I mean, if you think about newspapers, like the one thing still standing of all the attacks on it, it's still standing. It's still here. It's gotten smaller and tighter, and it continues to get smaller and tighter. But I just don't see it going anywhere because it's the one thing you can depend on as being credible, and being the source of democracy that Brian talked about when he did his opening. I just think that our place in society is so rich, and while it is battled and bruised, we aren't going anywhere.
Let me ask one more question, then I'll turn to a few questions from our viewers. The Herald's editorial page hasn't been shy in voicing its opinions and criticism of state leaders in Tallahassee, local leaders here, whenever they feel it's warranted. And that's obviously a separate part of the newspaper that you're not involved in. But do those views, do those editorials affect the ability of your reporters to do their job?
Really interesting question, especially now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that relationship. But you're right, that statement is absolutely correct. The board has not been shy about voicing its criticism of state leaders, particularly the assault on Floridians' constitutional rights to protest, to be informed, to vote unimpeded. Our focus on the editorial side is how do we help people live safe and healthy lives, and that's just for starters. And so we're writing commentary on behalf of all Floridians. Last year, after the Ed Board criticized how DeSantis was handling early weeks of the pandemic, the governor shut out one of our reporters from his press conferences, right? And would not answer her questions. And we wrote about that too. But I would say, I have sort of two sides to that, two answers to that, and they're very different. On one hand, yes, of course, it can sometimes make a reporter's job harder because they have to take a moment to educate the community about how editorial boards work compared to the newsroom. And that's not always easy. And it's an expectation that you don't want to spend your time and your job as a reporter having to focus on that. But we do find ourselves, particularly when we have columnists like Leonard or Andres or Fabi, they're writing really strong opinion. And one person's opinion, but it doesn't reflect our newsroom plans, nor does it reflect our decisions or thoughts. But it does place a burden, if you will, on the reporters to be able to explain the difference. It also places a burden on our presentation too of the content and making sure that we're able to help our readers distinguish between one versus the other. Like when you have opinion on the labeled on the content, but sometimes people don't see that, right? And they get into it and think, oh, there they go. They see the headline and say, oh, there they go. So there certainly is still today a wall between editorial opinion and the editorial content side. But I will say this: the walls are not as solid as they were before, because we are having more conversations between the two groups around what we're covering, what we're writing about, what's important, what are the issues that matter in the legislative session, right? And making sure we're aligned on some topics, but that doesn't mean that one is necessarily influencing the other. But we are making some real strides and efforts to make sure that the two sides are communicating more. And so it's on us to make sure that on the reporting side that we're able to maintain that be objective, but it's a balance, right? We don't want to give a sense that the editorial opinion side is influencing the reporting, but they work better together, particularly when we're trying to achieve change. It's the approach that they take that's different. And that, we expect that to be different, right? But I'm someone who looks forward to that. I think what we found, the other thing we found, I've seen this in research over the course of the last 2 years, even when I was in Atlanta, people, our audiences want to see the opinion, right? They actually, they don't agree, but the audience numbers on the opinion content side are stronger than they've ever been before, because people want to know what you think, particularly when you get down to looking at the demographics of the millennial. And I hate to refer to that demographic that way, but if you look at it that way, the shift in mindset of how we help me think this through. What do you think? How do I engage with this? That's your point of view. So it's helping me to develop my own. And I'm not necessarily going to agree with that point of view, but I can step very intelligently into a conversation about, well, there's this side of it versus that side of it. And so I think the power of the opinion pages across newsrooms has grown even more over the course of the last few years. But again, it does, in some ways makes it difficult for reporters, but we can still maintain that balance and objectivity. So, but working together more has proven to have some success points for sure.
Let me bring in a few questions here. One actually comes from Brian from Dean Schreiner, who asks, what role might higher education play in enhancing local professional journalism, say with respect to partnering with the Miami Herald or El Nuevo or others?
Yeah, I think, I think it comes through research. Many times in the course of the last couple of months, I've said, can we get the local university to do some polling with this, like to reach out to the communities, right? I think our local universities like FIU will have, you are as in touch with communities, local communities, as the newspaper is. And so that creates an inevitable partnership that should be there for one. I think the work in space around artificial intelligence that I mentioned earlier, there's great opportunity there because this is a place that we don't have as much knowledge as we would like to have. Obviously, we do on the tech side of things in our, and within McClatchy, but within our newsrooms, how do we use AI to make our reporting stronger? How do we use it to find stories? How do we use it to share stories? And so all of the teaching aspects that come around getting content and creating content, I think are clear opportunities for partnership. And I welcome and pleased to be able to say that the Miami Herald is a partner in this space of education. I also think that, I have been pleasantly surprised that there's still place for journalism instruction and that the basics of journalism are still being taught and that people are still graduating and want to be journalists. Like they want to be investigative journalists. And it's not something that while you might think the industry is, some might say dying, there's changing, but there's still such passion around it. Especially, I think that's another thing to come out of the last 2 years, right? This passion around service, public service journalism, and people, especially our younger people, wanting to be a part of that. So those partnerships of whether it's developing journalists or improving our journalism or improving how we deliver it in our communities, those are all like rich places for partnership in the education side.
So we got a few questions coming in here. They always sort of flooded it toward the end, but Neil Reisner asks a really interesting question. What about the wall separating the news side from the business side? How high is it in a world where, how high is the wall in a world where more page views equals more ads equals more revenue? Interesting question.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. So in the Miami Herald, that relationship is still probably a distant one, right? We are not in the space of creating content to create page views to get the programmatic advertising. Like that equation works, but I want my journalists focusing on doing great stories for the audience, and that leads to page views, and then let the advertising and business side take care of, the growth that they need to take care of. That said, I think that, there are places like in the area of features and food content and sports content where there's opportunity for sponsorships on the business side. And we do have those conversations, but they're much more at a leadership level than they are reporters being involved in that. The newsroom level is definitely not involved in that. So those decisions come at in the leadership space, more so than they ever would on the reporting level. There's not a day or time I would expect, and anybody on the business side wouldn't want to do that, right? Those lines have got to be clear. When I was in Atlanta, we actually had a team that was called the content revenue team, and they created content to focus on sponsorships and created contents for advertisers. That made sense. That's not what you want your newsroom to do, but you can create hybrid teams to be able to serve that function.
Before I go on to some other questions, Neil followed up with a specific question asking, do reporters' page views go toward their evaluations?
That sounds like a reporter just jumped in here and asked that question.
Neil, do you work at the Herald? Do you want to know how you're going to be evaluated?
Yeah, right. Okay, so yeah, I mean, reporters have all kinds of goals, right? And page views, depending on the role, might be the goal that you have. We have a team in the newsroom known as the real-time team. They're cranking out a lot of news, 10, 15 stories a day compared to other reporters who aren't on that cycle. The page views are going to be different. The expectations are going to be different, but it's one goal of others, right? Journalism excellence, right? Investigative journalism, data journalism, those are part of goals too. So it is one measure, but it is not the only measure of success that we have for our staff. So hopefully that answers the question, but of course, it just varies by role.
Yeah, and Neil has said, he followed up and said, yes, I used to work at the Herald, and he's now an FIU professor. So thank you, Neil, for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gene Rosenberg asks about the how separate both in content, editorial, business sides are the Herald and the El Nuevo Herald. Which one has more readers? Has circulation declined, increased to different extents at the two papers?
Yeah, they have different readership, obviously. Obviously one is the Spanish language product. The Miami Herald is clearly the audience driver for South Florida as it relates to McClatchy. So and we're experiencing some challenge there on the El Nuevo side. We're thinking about right now how we build up the audience there, how we really trying to understand, is it a younger audience? Is it an older audience? Is it an audience that is following our coverage of Cuba and Venezuela and Puerto Rico? How important is that? All of those things are questions that are really right in front of us right now as we think about El Nuevo as a product of the Miami Herald, a product of McClatchy. Definitely have some challenges there, but it's another room full of incredibly talented journalists that are providing content for a Spanish language audience. So that one is a place where we are looking for some long-term opportunities for how we can get some growth for sure.
So let me, I know we're running short on time. I've got two other questions that were submitted here that I'd like to pose, and then the final one about advice to journalism students. And these are from anonymous viewers. What is your view on the comment sections below articles? This person says, I like it, I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like it, I don't like it. So no, we're in a place right now where if you comment, you're commenting through Facebook or some other social entity. I don't like it because it allows people to be anonymous. You can't establish relationships. You can't, there's a lot of buzz and a lot of things you want to ignore. There are some topics where it's especially polarizing. Anything you post around crime suddenly becomes a conversation about race, right? Really, it seems like anything these days becomes a conversation about race relations. But so that makes it challenging. We are trying to find ways to use it though, to be smarter about it. So one of the things we recently started thinking about doing was having groups for subscribers to not complain, but have real conversation about topics, right? And we're trying to engage that and do more one-on-one discussion with the people who, do want to have a true conversation, or to really do want to engage with the content and engage with the writers of the content. So we're looking for those opportunities, but I think it's a love-hate relationship that I would say, and I'm speaking personally, not really on behalf of, I'm speaking as a journalist, right? That it really is it can be a great place if you can engage the right people and get the right audience, but it can be a really frustrating place on the opposite side of that.
Yeah, I've discovered sometimes it's best not to look at the comments section.
Yeah, it really is
Article
best not
and
to look at
publish
the
it somewhere.
comment section.
Yeah,
I
not if
have,
you want to sleep that night.
Yeah, exactly.
So one more, and then the final question. This person asks, I've noticed that newspapers have been posting original documents in their articles. As a reader, I appreciate it. Yes, I do look for the original sources behind the headlines. How about an article about how reporters go about doing their research?
Oh yeah. So I love that I'll take that as a suggestion actually, but I love that because the other thing we found is when we allow the reporters, like instead of me writing a letter to the audience, when a reporter can write a letter to the audience, they perform so much better because they're able to share their experience, right? I think another thing we really want to focus on is that we're focusing on this year is making sure people understand why we do what we do and how we do it. So that is definitely something that I hope you'll begin to see more of from the Miami Herald is hearing more from our reporters directly about their experience and their approaches to the content. With every big project, we always try to have how we got the story. And those are probably moments that we need to take more advantage of as well. So thank you for that question, and I'll take that as a suggestion as well.
Great. And last question, we are Florida International University. So, and we do have a School of Communications and we have journalism students, but not just for journalism students here. What advice would you give, maybe both to that 8-year-old like you were, who knew from that early age that he or she wanted to be a journalist, to somebody who's studying at the university right now? What advice would you give for aspiring journalism students?
Yeah, so I have a few things on that. The first one is, if you don't have one, find you a good mentor, build those relationships. The first question you asked about kind of how I got here was really based on relationships that I've built. Journalism is a small world. It's a smaller world than you might expect. And every move that I've made, I've realized that because I meet somebody who, I knew years ago from either another newsroom or, we have this 2-3 degrees of separation of knowing someone from another newsroom. So it's really important to have those relationships and establish some mentors who, when you are in the market, can help you navigate, because often that's how the jobs happen. It's through someone you knew. And so building those relationships are super, super critical. It also gives you an outlet of someone to be critical of your work. Help you throw away your babies, if you will. We become more critical of ourselves when we can have someone help us find things about our work or ourselves that we didn't know. And so that's the other value, I think, of having a mentor in those relationships. The other thing I would say is really just stick behind what you believe. Don't bend or fold to the I guess I should think with that angle, or I guess I should do it this way. The most passionate of journalists are the ones who have stuck behind their values. They don't bend, right? They are hard charging, really. And so just having a sense of stick to itness. This isn't a place where you come to make a lot of money, right? But this is a place that is passionate about the work and about the mission. And so have that sense of stick to itness. The other thing I would say is leaning into your craft, right? Finding ways to be better writers, storytellers, and often that comes from reading others, right? and listening to others. Some of my favorite podcasts come from storytelling. And so finding ways to lean into the craft is really important. And then the last thing I think I would give in terms of advice is to bring your whole self to what you're doing, right? The reason that that I am here is because I bring experiences that others don't have. And so you've got to bring your whole self. I'm not coming to be like Mindy was, right? I'm coming to be Monica. And so being able to give yourself and put your own life experiences into being a journalist and growing. The other thing I would just say, I just never, like every no to me was like, okay, well, I'll just go to another door, right? I mean, and I guess that goes back to not giving up. Not giving up. If this is your dream, don't give up on that dream. Find a way to get there. And the great thing about this industry is that there are people willing to help you do that because we want to see this industry grow. We want people to want to continue to fulfill this mission that we have in society. So I hope that helps. I could talk all day long. I mean, this place of mentoring and bringing up young talent is a rich place for me, particularly, younger people and women and minorities, disenfranchised communities. Like that is at the core of, to me personally speaking, like it's part of our mission too. It's a part of my job is to make sure that I leave the door behind me open for others. And so that aspiring, I would say keep aspiring, right? And keep making it happen and find the people who can help you get to the result you want to have. I'm excited to be in this space. And I hope that I get a chance to meet some of your students actually and talk some more with you all. It's been great being here today. I really appreciate you all having me. Please do reach out. I'm Richardson at miamiherald.com. Very easy. I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter for the same reasons we talked about the comments.
Right.
So while I have an account, you won't see me spending a lot of time there, but I definitely am accessible and open and willing to talk to people and have conversations about what's happening at the Miami Herald, how we're serving our communities. I would encourage people to support local journalism. Doesn't have to be the Miami Herald. I would love it to be, right? But support your local journalists. Let them know when they've done something right. Let them know when they've done something maybe you might disagree with, because that engagement is critical to our work.
Well, I think I can safely speak for Dean Schreiner and Dean Stack in saying we would love to have you over here on campus. Well, I'm not actually on campus right now,
Right,
but when we're all back on campus, because what you just said in this last answer was gold. And I think for you to be able to say that directly to students and for them to have an opportunity to follow up would just be an invaluable opportunity for them. So Monica Richardson, I would say that McClatchy and the Herald chose very wisely and chose extremely well. I've been around long enough and have done enough of these to know that when they go as quickly as this one did, that is a good sign. Okay. And I'm really grateful to you. And I think speaking on behalf of Dean Schreiner and Dean Stack and the rest of the FIU community, I want to wish you the very best in this challenging but exciting new assignment.
Thank you.
As I say, I think they made a brilliant pick. And this has been a terrific conversation. I'm very grateful. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to see everybody. All right. Take care.
All the best. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.